The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the Vienna International Court of Justice, its rays illuminating the marble columns that had witnessed decades of international legal proceedings. Among the greatest institutions of post-war Europe, the court had heard cases involving war crimes, territorial disputes, and crimes against humanity from across the continent. On this particular autumn day in 2025, the courtroom was hearing testimony in a complex case involving alleged war crimes committed during the Yugoslav conflicts of the 1990s. New evidence had emerged, declassified documents suggesting that certain atrocities had been deliberately concealed by international observers at the time. Dr. Elena Richter entered the courtroom with the measured steps of someone accustomed to academic environments. At 62, she possessed the understated elegance common among Vienna's intellectual elite. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, and she wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a cream silk blouse. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose gave her the appearance of the distinguished historian she was known to be. To the assembled lawyers, journalists, and observers, Dr. Richter represented exactly what her credentials suggested: Professor Emeritus of Eastern European Studies at the University of Vienna, author of several respected books on Cold War diplomacy, and a recognized expert on intelligence operations during the divided Europe era. What none of them knew was that her academic career had been built upon a foundation of operational experience that remained classified at the highest levels of European intelligence services. Judge Klaus Hoffmann called the court to order with the gravity befitting his position. A distinguished Austrian jurist with over 30 years of experience in international law, he had presided over some of Europe's most significant war crimes trials. His steel-gray hair and penetrating blue eyes commanded immediate respect, though those who knew his background were aware that before joining the judiciary, he had served as a legal advisor to Austrian intelligence services during the final decades of the Cold War. The court calls Dr. Elena Richter to provide expert testimony regarding intelligence operations in the Balkans during the period 1990 to 1995, Judge Hoffmann announced, his voice carrying the crisp authority of Austrian German. Elena rose and walked to the witness stand with perfect composure. As she took her oath, her eyes briefly met those of Judge Hoffmann. Something flickered between them, recognition perhaps, or the weight of shared history neither could acknowledge publicly. Dr. Richter, began Prosecutor Maria Santos, a Spanish attorney representing the International Criminal Court, please describe your qualifications to testify about intelligence operations during the Yugoslav conflicts. I hold a doctorate in modern European history from the University of Vienna, Elena replied in fluent English, though her slight Austrian accent was detectable. My specialization is intelligence services and diplomatic history during the Cold War period. I have written extensively about the transition from Cold War intelligence operations to post-Soviet security arrangements. What she did not mention was that her research had often involved direct participation in the events she later analyzed academically. The academic papers that had established her reputation were based on operational reports she had written herself, carefully sanitized and published years after the fact. Prosecutor Santos continued, are you familiar with the intelligence assessments that were provided to international observers during the Yugoslav conflicts? Yes, I have studied those assessments extensively. Many contain significant inaccuracies that may have influenced international responses to developing atrocities. Elena's testimony was methodical and devastating. She described how intelligence reports had been systematically altered to downplay early warnings of ethnic cleansing. How certain massacre sites had been misidentified to protect ongoing intelligence operations. How the international community had been deliberately kept uninformed about the scope of planned atrocities. Throughout her 2-hour testimony, Elena maintained the professional demeanor of an academic expert. Her voice never wavered, her responses were precise, and her documentation was impeccable. To any observer, she was simply a scholar presenting historical analysis. But Judge Hoffmann watched her with increasing intensity. Something about her precise knowledge of operational details, her familiarity with intelligence terminology, and her understanding of classified procedure suggested expertise that went beyond academic research. Defense attorney Hans Müller, representing several accused war criminals, challenged Elena's testimony aggressively. Dr. Richter, you claim that intelligence reports were deliberately falsified. Do you have direct evidence of this falsification? The pattern of inaccuracies is too systematic to be accidental, Elena replied calmly. When multiple intelligence services provide contradictory assessments of the same events, and when those assessments consistently minimize evidence of planned atrocities, the conclusion is obvious. But you have no direct knowledge of how these reports were prepared. Elena paused for just a moment, long enough for Judge Hoffman to notice the careful calculation behind her response. I have studied the methodology of intelligence assessment preparation extensively, Counselor. The patterns I describe are inconsistent with standard analytical procedures. It was a masterful non-answer that revealed nothing while implying everything. As Elena's testimony continued into the afternoon, the courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Her revelations about systematic intelligence failures were undermining several defense strategies and potentially exposing high-level complicity in war crimes cover-ups. During a brief recess, defense attorney Mueller conferred urgently with his clients and contacted several government officials. By the time court reconvened, additional security personnel had appeared in the gallery, and Elena noticed that her movements were being more closely monitored. Dr. Richter, Mueller continued his cross-examination. You claim to have expertise in intelligence operations, but your academic record shows no direct experience with intelligence services. That is correct, Elena replied evenly. My expertise is based on historical research and analysis. And yet your knowledge of operational procedures seems remarkably detailed for someone whose experience is purely academic. Elena's expression remained neutral, but Judge Hoffman detected a slight tightening around her eyes. I have conducted extensive interviews with former intelligence personnel and have had access to declassified materials. Mueller pressed his advantage. In fact, Dr. Richter, isn't it true that you have never worked for any intelligence service? I have never been an employee of any intelligence service, Elena replied with lawyer-like precision. The distinction was subtle but significant. Elena had never been an employee, but she had been something else entirely. As the afternoon wore on, Elena's testimony grew more specific and damaging. She described how Operation Danube Watch, a joint European intelligence initiative, had deliberately suppressed evidence of planned massacres to protect ongoing operations against Serbian intelligence networks. The priority was maintaining asset penetration rather than preventing civilian casualties, she testified with clinical detachment. Intelligence services calculated that exposing their sources would compromise long-term strategic objectives. Mueller objected repeatedly, claiming Elena couldn't possibly know such detailed operational information from academic sources alone. Each time, Judge Hoffman overruled, though his expression grew increasingly troubled. At 4:30 p.m., court security approached the bench. The head of security, Captain Franz Weber, whispered something to Judge Hoffman that caused the judge's face to tighten with concern. The court will implement enhanced security protocols, Judge Hoffman announced. All persons in the courtroom will be subject to additional screening procedures. What he didn't announce was that Captain Weber had informed him that several individuals with possible intelligence service connections had been observed outside the courthouse, and that electronic surveillance equipment had detected encrypted communications being transmitted from within the building. Elena remained composed as security officers began conducting enhanced checks of all courtroom personnel. When they reached her position at the witness stand, Captain Weber addressed her directly. Dr. Richter, as per enhanced security protocols, I need to ask you to remove your jacket so we can verify you are not carrying any electronic devices or recording equipment. The request was standard procedure, implemented hundreds of times in international courts. Elena had expected it might come, had prepared for this possibility for decades. Yet in that moment, she felt the weight of 40 years of carefully maintained secrecy. She stood slowly, her movements measured and deliberate. With practiced efficiency, she removed her charcoal blazer, folding it neatly and placing it on the witness stand ledge. Beneath the jacket, she wore a simple cream silk blouse with short sleeves. On her left arm, just below the shoulder, a small tattoo was clearly visible. The design was elegant and understated, a Habsburg double-headed eagle rendered in black ink, with 3 small stars arranged in a triangle above its wings. To most observers, it appeared to be simply a tasteful expression of Austrian patriotism. But Judge Hoffmann's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. His face drained of color as he stared at the tattoo. His hands gripped the edge of the bench, and his breathing became visibly shallow. For several seconds, the only sound in the courtroom was the whisper of air conditioning and the shuffle of papers. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the silent chamber. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Judge Hoffmann continued to stare at Elena's tattoo. Prosecutor Santos looked confused, defense attorney Mueller appeared concerned, and security personnel exchanged uncertain glances. Elena remained standing beside the witness chair, her expression calm but alert. She made no attempt to cover the tattoo or explain its significance. Instead, she met Judge Hoffmann's gaze directly, and in that exchange, 40 years of hidden history passed between them. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Santos asked tentatively, "is there a problem?" Judge Hoffmann seemed to struggle with how to respond. As a judge, he was bound by protocol and the rule of law. But the symbol on Elena's arm represented something that officially didn't exist, had never existed, and could never be acknowledged in open court. The Habsburg eagle with 3 stars was the identification mark of Operation Danube Bridge, the most classified intelligence program in Cold War Austrian history. Operatives who bore that mark had been part of a joint Austrian-NATO initiative that ran double agents between East and West, using Austria's neutral status as cover for some of the most dangerous espionage operations of the Cold War era. Judge Hoffmann had encountered that symbol only once before, in a classified briefing when he was a young legal advisor to Austrian intelligence. He had been told that fewer than 20 people had ever been authorized to bear that mark, and that all related operations had been terminated and records destroyed following the fall of the Berlin Wall. Yet here sat Dr. Elena Richter, distinguished academic and expert witness, bearing the unmistakable mark of one of the West's most secret intelligence programs. "Court will recess for 15 minutes, Judge Hoffmann announced, his voice strained. "Dr. Richter, please remain available to the court." As the courtroom cleared, Elena calmly put her jacket back on, covering the tattoo. But the damage was done. The secret she had carried for 4 decades had been exposed in the most public possible forum. Captain Weber approached her as she gathered her papers. "Dr. Richter, I need to ask you to accompany me to a secure room." Elena nodded without surprise. "I've been expecting this conversation for quite some time, Captain." In Judge Hoffmann's chambers, a crisis meeting was underway. Present were the judge, Court Security Chief Weber, and a hastily summoned representative from the Austrian Federal Ministry of the Interior. "Klaus," said Interior Ministry liaison Dr. Franz Kellner, using the judge's first name to indicate the gravity of the situation, "that symbol hasn't been seen in official contexts for over 30 years. If Dr. Richter is who that tattoo suggests she is, we have a major security situation." Judge Hoffmann paced behind his desk. "Franz, I was present at the briefing where they told us Operation Danube Bridge had been completely terminated. All assets were supposed to have been extracted or neutralized." "Apparently not all of them," Weber observed grimly. "The question is whether Dr. Richter is a compromised asset or if she's been operating under deep cover this entire time." Dr. Kellner activated a secure communication device. "I'm contacting current intelligence services. If Dr. Richter is legitimate, they'll need to confirm her status. If she's not..." The implications hung unspoken in the air. Meanwhile, in a secure room adjacent to the courtroom, Elena sat alone for the first time in decades with her true identity partially exposed. She had spent 40 years building and maintaining her academic cover, becoming one of Europe's most respected historians of intelligence operations while never revealing that she had participated in many of the events she studied. The irony was not lost on her. Her testimony about intelligence failures during the Yugoslav conflicts was based on her direct knowledge as an operative who had been embedded within the international observer networks. She had watched systematic deception unfold because she had been part of it. An hour later, Elena was escorted to a different secure facility within the Vienna International Court complex. The room was windowless and equipped with sophisticated electronic countermeasures, clearly designed for sensitive conversations. Waiting for her were Judge Hoffman, Dr. Kellner from the Interior Ministry, and a woman Elena didn't recognize but whose bearing and attire clearly indicated intelligence service affiliation. Dr. Richter, the unknown woman began, "I am Director Sarah Mitchell from the European Intelligence Coordination Center. We need to understand exactly who you are and what your presence in this courtroom represents." Elena studied the three officials for a moment before responding. "Director Mitchell, I assume you've already run background checks and confirmed my academic credentials are genuine." "We have. Professor Elena Richter has an impeccable record as a historian and intelligence studies expert. What we want to know is whether that identity represents your entire background." Elena smiled slightly, the first time she had shown any emotion since her tattoo was exposed. "Director, the Habsburg Eagle with 3 stars was never awarded to academics." Judge Hoffman leaned forward. "Elena, I need you to understand the legal situation. This court is hearing a case involving war crimes and intelligence failures. If you have direct knowledge of those events that goes beyond academic research, it could fundamentally change these proceedings. And it could also expose operations that remain classified and compromise individuals who are still alive," Elena replied evenly. Dr. Kellner consulted a secure tablet. "Dr. Richter, our records show that Operation Danube Bridge was officially terminated in 1991. All associated personnel were supposed to have been debriefed and their cover identities retired." "That's correct," Elena confirmed. "I was debriefed and my operational status was terminated. Elena Richter the academic became my permanent identity." Director Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "But you maintained the tattoo." "The tattoo was never intended to be permanent identification. It was applied during a specific operation and was supposed to be removed afterward. Circumstances prevented that from happening." Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "For 40 years, I have lived as Dr. Elena Richter, academic historian. My operational identity was completely compartmentalized. Until today, no one has questioned that separation." Judge Hoffman struggled with the implications. "Elena, if you have direct operational knowledge of intelligence activities during the Yugoslav conflicts, you may be legally obligated to disclose that information." "Your Honor, my operational knowledge is protected by classification levels that supersede this court's jurisdiction. I cannot and will not disclose information that could compromise ongoing operations or endanger personnel." The room fell silent as the officials grappled with an unprecedented situation. Elena had essentially confirmed that she was a former deep-cover intelligence operative, but she was refusing to provide details that could be crucial to the war crimes trial. Director Mitchell made a decision. "Dr. Richter, I'm going to ask you directly, do you have specific knowledge of intelligence operations that deliberately concealed evidence of war crimes in the Balkans?" Elena met her gaze steadily. "Director, I have knowledge of many operations that remain classified. Some of that knowledge informed my academic research and my testimony today. But I cannot provide specific operational details without proper authorization." "And how would we obtain such authorization?" "The authorization would have to come from the same level that originally classified the operations. Given that Operation Danube Bridge involved multiple NATO intelligence services, that authorization would require coordination at the highest levels of the alliance." Judge Hoffman realized the magnitude of what Elena was suggesting. "You're saying that to properly debrief you would require coordination between NATO intelligence services and the European court system?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, Your Honor. My operational background cannot be compartmentalized from the legal proceedings without compromising both." That evening, in a secure facility outside Vienna, Elena sat across from Director Mitchell and a small team of intelligence officials from various European services. For the first time in 40 years, she was prepared to discuss her operational background. "Operation Danube Bridge began in 1983, Elena began, her voice taking on the precise tone of a professional briefing. The objective was to establish a network of double agents who could operate between NATO and Warsaw Pact intelligence services, using Austria's neutral status as operational cover. She paused, organizing decades of classified memories. I was recruited while completing my doctorate at the University of Vienna. My academic focus on Eastern European history made me an ideal candidate for deep cover operations. Director Mitchell consulted classified files that had been hastily retrieved from various intelligence archives. According to these records, Operation Danube Bridge was considered one of the most successful penetration operations of the Cold War. It was successful because it was completely compartmentalized, Elena confirmed. Each operative maintained their cover identity as their primary identity. We became the people we were pretending to be. Elena's transformation from graduate student to deep cover operative had been gradual and carefully orchestrated. Over several years, she had been introduced to academic conferences where she met Eastern European historians and intelligence officers posing as academics. Her reputation grew, her network expanded, and she became a trusted source of information about Western academic attitudes toward socialist countries. By 1987, I was providing intelligence assessments to 3 different services, Austrian, Soviet, and American, each believing I was exclusively theirs, Elena continued. The information I provided was carefully coordinated to maintain the balance of the operation. The true genius of Operation Danube Bridge was its use of Austria's unique position during the Cold War. As a neutral country with ties to both East and West, Austria provided the perfect cover for operatives who needed to move between the two sides without raising suspicion. The operation's greatest success came during the transition period after 1989, Elena explained. As the Soviet Union collapsed, we were able to provide early warning of potential instabilities and help coordinate the peaceful transition of several Eastern European intelligence services. But the operation's greatest challenge came with the outbreak of conflict in Yugoslavia. By 1991, several Danube Bridge operatives were embedded within international observer missions in the Balkans, Elena revealed. Our primary mission was to monitor the effectiveness of international intelligence cooperation in preventing large-scale atrocities. Director Mitchell leaned forward. Are you saying that Danube Bridge operatives were present during the early stages of the Yugoslav conflicts? We were present, and we were reporting on the systematic failures of international intelligence coordination that I testified about today. Elena's voice became more somber as she continued. We watched as intelligence reports were altered or suppressed to protect ongoing operations. We documented how warnings about planned atrocities were ignored because they would have compromised agent networks. We saw the international community deliberately kept uninformed about developing genocides. The weight of Elena's revelations was staggering. She was describing a systematic failure of international intelligence cooperation that had contributed to some of the worst atrocities in post-war European history. Dr. Richter, Judge Hoffman said quietly, if this information had been available to the court during the original war crimes trials, it would have changed everything, Elena finished. Commanders who were convicted of ordering atrocities would have been revealed as following orders that were influenced by deliberate intelligence deception. International officials who claimed ignorance of developing genocides would have been exposed as having access to accurate information they chose to ignore. The secure debriefing continued through the night as Elena provided details about Operation Danube Bridge that had never been officially recorded. Her academic career had been the perfect cover for maintaining contact with intelligence sources across Europe, allowing her to monitor the long-term consequences of Cold War operations. The current war crimes case is not an isolated incident, Elena explained. Many of the intelligence failures that occurred during the Yugoslav conflicts were the result of institutional practices that began during the Cold War and were never properly reformed. She described how intelligence services had prioritized protecting sources and methods over preventing atrocities, how international courts had been systematically denied access to crucial information, and how academic institutions had unknowingly provided cover for ongoing intelligence operations. Dr. Richter, Director Mitchell asked, why did you choose to expose this information now? You could have maintained your cover indefinitely. Elena considered the question carefully. Because the patterns I helped document are being repeated. Intelligence failures that contributed to genocides in the 1990s are occurring again in current conflicts. The institutional problems that allowed Operation Danube Bridge to operate without oversight still exist. Elena revealed that her testimony in the war crimes case had been deliberately designed to expose these patterns. She had spent years documenting intelligence failures, preparing evidence, and waiting for the right opportunity to bring these issues to international attention. The Yugoslav conflicts were not the end of the story, she continued. They were a preview of what happens when intelligence services operate without proper accountability to international legal institutions. Judge Hoffman grappled with the legal implications. Elena, if your testimony today was based on direct operational knowledge rather than academic research, it fundamentally changes the nature of your evidence. Your Honor, my testimony was completely accurate regardless of its source. The question is whether the court system is prepared to acknowledge that some academic experts have backgrounds that go beyond traditional research. Elena's revelation raised profound questions about the relationship between intelligence services and international legal institutions. How many other academic experts were actually former intelligence operatives? How much of the historical record was based on sanitized versions of operational reports? How could international courts obtain accurate information when intelligence services had systematic reasons to withhold or distort evidence? After 3 days of closed-door consultations involving multiple governments and intelligence services, Judge Hoffman reconvened the court for an unprecedented session. Present were the original participants in the war crimes trial, plus additional officials from various European intelligence services and diplomatic representatives from several NATO countries. This court faces an extraordinary situation, Judge Hoffman announced. We have received testimony from a witness whose qualifications to provide that testimony extend beyond what was initially disclosed. Elena sat in the witness chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had replaced her academic attire with a more formal business suit, and she no longer made any attempt to conceal the tattoo on her arm. Dr. Richter, Judge Hoffman continued, you have confirmed that your testimony was based not only on academic research but also on direct operational experience with intelligence activities relevant to this case. That is correct, Your Honor. And you have indicated that providing full details of that operational experience would require clearances and authorizations beyond the scope of this court. Yes, Your Honor. However, I can confirm that my testimony regarding intelligence failures during the Yugoslav conflicts was completely accurate, regardless of its source. Prosecutor Santos stood. Your Honor, if Dr. Richter has direct knowledge of intelligence operations that concealed evidence of war crimes, that information could be crucial to achieving justice for the victims. Defense Attorney Mueller immediately objected. Your Honor, if Dr. Richter's testimony was based on classified intelligence operations, it should be excluded from these proceedings entirely. Elena requested permission to address the court directly. Your Honor, for 40 years I have maintained a careful separation between my operational background and my academic career. Today, that separation has been compromised through circumstances beyond my control. She stood, her bearing shifting subtly but unmistakably from academic expert to intelligence professional. However, the substance of my testimony stands on its own merit. The intelligence failures I described occurred exactly as I testified. International institutions were systematically denied access to information that could have prevented atrocities. The evidence supporting these conclusions is available through academic sources, declassified documents, and the historical record. Elena paused, choosing her final words carefully. The fact that some of us who study intelligence operations have direct experience with those operations should not disqualify our testimony. It should add weight to our conclusions about institutional failures that continue to this day. Judge Hoffman delivered his ruling after a brief recess. This court accepts Dr. Richter's testimony as expert evidence based on her demonstrated expertise in intelligence operations, regardless of the source of that expertise. However, the court also recognizes that certain aspects of her background remain classified and cannot be explored in these proceedings. He turned to Elena directly. Dr. Richter, your testimony has provided this court with crucial insights into intelligence failures that contributed to the atrocities we are investigating. That testimony will stand as part of the official record. The implications of the ruling extended far beyond the specific war crimes case. For the first time, an international court had officially acknowledged that academic experts might have operational backgrounds that enhanced rather than compromised their credibility. In the weeks following Elena's testimony, the ripple effects spread throughout European intelligence communities and academic institutions. The revelation that a respected historian had been a deep-cover operative for 4 decades raised questions about the relationship between scholarship and intelligence work. Elena returned to her teaching position at the University of Vienna, but her status had fundamentally changed. Students and colleagues who had known her as Dr. Elena Richter, distinguished academic, now understood that her expertise was based on direct experience with the events she had studied. The war crimes trial continued, but Elena's testimony had shifted its focus from individual culpability to systemic failures. Defense attorneys could no longer claim that their clients had acted on incomplete information, and prosecutors gained access to new avenues of investigation into intelligence service complicity. 3 months after her testimony, Elena received a visit from Director Mitchell at her university office. Dr. Richter, several governments have requested formal debriefings about Operation Danube Bridge and related activities. Elena looked up from the historical manuscript she had been reviewing. Director, I've spent 40 years providing those governments with information through my academic work. Perhaps it's time they started reading it more carefully. Director Mitchell smiled slightly. Point taken. However, there are specific operational details that weren't included in your published research. Because those details remain classified, Elena replied firmly. My academic work included everything that could be safely disclosed without compromising ongoing operations or endangering personnel. The conversation represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between intelligence services and academic institutions. Elena had demonstrated that former operatives could transition successfully to academic careers while maintaining appropriate security protocols. There's another matter, Director Mitchell continued. Several universities have inquired about establishing formal programs where former intelligence personnel could transition to academic roles. Elena considered this carefully. Such programs would need very careful structure to protect both operational security and academic integrity. But yes, there are probably others who could benefit from legitimate academic careers. A year after Elena's courtroom revelation, the Vienna International Court hosted a conference on intelligence, academia, and international justice. Elena was invited as the keynote speaker, representing a new model for the intersection of operational experience and scholarly expertise. The artificial separation between those who conduct intelligence operations and those who study them has served neither community well, Elena told the assembled academics, legal professionals, and intelligence officials. She had spent the past year developing a framework for ethical integration of operational experience with academic scholarship, working with universities and intelligence services to create guidelines for former operatives who wished to pursue academic careers. Intelligence operations occur within historical contexts that benefit from scholarly analysis, she continued. Similarly, academic study of intelligence activities benefits from the insights of those who have direct operational experience. Elena's model had gained support from unexpected quarters. Intelligence services appreciated having former operatives in academic positions where they could provide historical context for current operations. Universities valued the expertise that former operatives brought to intelligence studies programs. International legal institutions recognized the value of expert witnesses who could provide both scholarly analysis and operational insight. But the model also required careful safeguards. Former operatives entering academic careers had to undergo extensive security reviews to ensure they could distinguish between information that could be shared academically and details that must remain classified. Universities had to develop protocols for evaluating scholarship that might be based on classified sources. The Habsburg Eagle tattoo that exposed my background was originally intended as temporary operational identification, Elena concluded her keynote address. Instead, it became a permanent symbol of the connection between operational experience and historical understanding. She touched her arm where the tattoo remained visible beneath her sleeve. We cannot separate intelligence operations from their historical context, and we cannot fully understand that context without acknowledging the experiences of those who participated in creating it. 2 years after her revelation in the Vienna courtroom, Elena published her most significant work, the Danube Bridge Papers, Intelligence Operations and Historical Truth in Cold War Europe. The book, written with full authorization from multiple intelligence services, provided the first detailed account of a major Cold War intelligence operation by someone who had participated in it. The work established a new standard for intelligence history, combining rigorous academic methodology with authentic operational insight. It also served as a model for how classified information could be responsibly disclosed for historical purposes without compromising ongoing security interests. Elena's university office had become a destination for former intelligence operatives considering academic careers. She had developed an informal network of advisors who helped former operatives navigate the transition from operational roles to scholarly positions. The key, she explained to a former CIA analyst who was considering a doctorate in international relations, is understanding that your operational experience enhances your academic work rather than replacing it. You still need to meet the same scholarly standards as any other academic. Elena had also become a consultant to international legal institutions seeking to improve their access to intelligence-related evidence. Her experience had demonstrated that former operatives could serve as expert witnesses while maintaining appropriate security protocols. The war crimes case that had exposed her background had concluded with several significant convictions, supported in part by Elena's testimony about systematic intelligence failures. More importantly, the case had established precedents for how international courts could access intelligence-related evidence without compromising ongoing operations. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Elena sat in her Vienna apartment, reviewing student papers on Cold War intelligence operations. Many of her current students were unaware of her operational background, knowing her simply as a distinguished professor with remarkable insight into intelligence activities. Her phone rang with a call from Director Mitchell. "Elena, we have a situation developing in the Balkans that has similarities to the Yugoslav conflicts. Would you be available for consultation?" Elena considered the request. At 64, she had officially retired from operational activities, but her expertise remained valuable for understanding how historical patterns might repeat in contemporary conflicts. "Sarah, my consulting rate is quite reasonable, full academic credit for any resulting analysis, complete editorial control over publications, and no activities that would compromise my university position." Director Mitchell laughed. "Elena, you've single-handedly changed how intelligence services work with academics. I think we can meet your terms." As Elena prepared for what might be her final contribution to intelligence work, she reflected on the unexpected path that had led from her youthful recruitment as a graduate student to her current position as one of Europe's most respected intelligence historians. The Habsburg eagle tattoo that had once been a symbol of her secret identity had become a bridge between two worlds that had long remained separate. By demonstrating that operational experience and academic scholarship could be ethically combined, she had helped create new possibilities for both intelligence professionals and historical researchers. 5 years after Elena's revelation in the Vienna courtroom, the Richter model had been adopted by universities and intelligence services throughout Europe and North America. Former operatives were pursuing academic careers in increasing numbers, bringing operational insights to intelligence studies programs while maintaining appropriate security protocols. Elena continued teaching at the University of Vienna, though her courses had evolved to reflect her unique background. Her Intelligence and Historical Method seminar had become one of the most sought-after courses in the university's history department, attracting students from around the world. The war crimes trial that had accidentally exposed her background had led to broader reforms in how international legal institutions obtained intelligence-related evidence. Courts now had established procedures for working with expert witnesses who possessed operational backgrounds, and intelligence services had developed guidelines for supporting academic research that served both scholarly and security interests. Elena's academic work had expanded beyond historical analysis to include policy recommendations for improving intelligence accountability. Her research on institutional failures during the Yugoslav conflicts had influenced reforms in how intelligence services coordinated with international organizations during humanitarian crises. On a winter evening in Vienna, Elena received an unexpected visitor. A young woman in her 20s knocked on her office door after hours, introducing herself as a graduate student in international relations. "Professor Richter, I'm hoping you might provide some guidance about career decisions," the student said nervously. Elena invited her to sit down, recognizing something familiar in the young woman's careful manner and alert intelligence. "I've been offered an opportunity to work for an international organization that monitors conflict zones," the student continued. "The position would involve traveling to dangerous areas and reporting on human rights situations." Elena studied the young woman carefully, noting details that reminded her of her own recruitment 40 years earlier: exceptional language skills, advanced degrees in relevant fields, and a combination of idealism and pragmatism that suggested suitability for complex work. "This international organization," Elena asked carefully, "would it happen to require security clearances and involve reporting that might not be published immediately?" The student nodded, understanding that Elena had grasped the real nature of the opportunity. "Professor, I've read your work on intelligence operations and historical research. If someone were to accept such a position, how would they maintain academic integrity while serving broader security interests?" Elena smiled, recognizing herself at that age and understanding that the conversation was as much about recruitment as it was about career guidance. "The most important thing," Elena replied, "is to remember that whatever role you choose, you must always be prepared to stand behind your work in public. Academic integrity and operational effectiveness are not contradictory if you maintain clear ethical standards." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Also, avoid permanent tattoos unless you're absolutely certain you want to explain them in court someday." As the student left, Elena reflected on how much had changed since her own recruitment. The next generation of intelligence professionals would have the benefit of the frameworks she had helped develop, the legal precedents she had established, and the academic pathways she had pioneered. But they would also face new challenges that Elena's generation had never anticipated. Digital surveillance, cyber warfare, and global terrorism required different approaches than the Cold War intelligence operations that had defined her career. Elena returned to her desk and opened a new document on her computer. She had been commissioned to write a handbook for intelligence professionals transitioning to academic careers, and the conversation with the graduate student had reminded her of several important points she needed to include. Chapter 12, Maintaining Operational Security in Academic Settings, she typed, then paused to consider her words carefully. The irony was not lost on her that she was now training others to do what she had learned through decades of trial and error. The Habsburg eagle tattoo that had accidentally exposed her operational background had led to systematic reforms that would benefit countless future intelligence professionals. As she worked late into the Vienna evening, Elena could see the lights of the city spreading below her office window. Somewhere in those lights were former operatives beginning academic careers, current students preparing for intelligence work, and legal professionals grappling with the intersection of security and justice that her revelation had helped define. The quiet academic who had once coordinated some of the Cold War's most sensitive intelligence operations had become something she had never expected, a bridge between two worlds that had long operated in isolation from each other. And in courtrooms, universities, and intelligence services across Europe, the precedents she had established continued to evolve, ensuring that the lessons of Operation Danube Bridge would inform both historical understanding and contemporary security challenges. Have you ever wondered how many ordinary people around you might have extraordinary hidden backgrounds? Share your thoughts in the comments about the importance of recognizing that expertise can come from unexpected sources. Subscribe to Silent Legends for more stories of hidden courage that shaped our world.